When I was a kid, there was nothing that I enjoyed quite like a good mystery. My personal favorites were Encyclopedia Brown and, of course, Scooby-Doo. I just enjoyed the challenge of trying to figure it all out. There was something exciting about being in the dark with only a sparse set of suspicions and clues to light my path. And in the end, I was always satisfied. At the end of every book, at the end of every 30-minute episode, there was always that cathartic moment, the moment of explanation, the moment in which the situation, or villain, was unmasked and set plainly in the light for all to see and understand. That moment where everything from before was put into perspective and made completely intelligible, all tied up in a nice, neat little bow, all figured out. Nicodemus came to Jesus that night thinking that he and the other Pharisees had figured out the mystery, the answer to the question, who is this man? They had their own suspicions about the identity of Jesus. After all, they perhaps had heard about or even witnessed the clues. That is, the signs that Jesus had previously done in Cana of Galilee and Jerusalem. Maybe they heard of how Jesus had turned water into wine at that wedding in Cana, which perhaps brought to mind the miracles of the Old Testament prophets. Or maybe they had witnessed how Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple in Jerusalem, a seemingly prophetic act for which the people asked for justification in terms of a prophetic sign. What sign can you show us for doing this, they ask. And of course, Jesus being Jesus, he gives them an answer. But it was not the answer they expected or wanted. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Who is this man? That was the question that reverberated through Nicodemus' mind as he walked down the path that night to where Jesus and his followers were staying for the Passover festival. Nicodemus and his compatriots believed that they had found the answer to this question because, remember, they had been paying attention to the clues. Rabbi, he says to Jesus, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do apart from the presence of God. Now, we will never know what sort of response Nicodemus expected from Jesus. Perhaps Nicodemus expected Jesus to tell him that he got it right, that the clues had led him to the right conclusion, that he had put his finger on it, saw Jesus plainly for who he was, but judging from the exchange that follows, we can tell that Nicodemus received the unexpected response. I see a lot of myself in Nicodemus, and I wonder if you do too. Like him, there are those times in which I think that I have Jesus all figured out. I feel safe and secure in my knowledge. But then I realize that I actually don't have him quite figured out at all. I realize that I'm in the dark. Nicodemus claimed that Jesus was a teacher come from God, and that much was true. But that wasn't the whole picture. Something was missing. There was something more. But something had to happen in order for Nicodemus to begin to understand what this more could be. He had to have all of his preconceived notions complicated. Everything that he thought he knew about Jesus stripped away. He had to plunge into the dark depths of mystery, that place where water and spirit intermingle. He had to get to the point of spiritual and intellectual surrender, looking beyond clues and signs because he was in the very presence of mystery insoluble, the presence in which clues are stretched to their very limit and even begin to lose meaning. He had to get to the point of asking the question, how can these things be? It takes a certain amount of bravery to admit such poverty, especially in a day and age in which we are so sure and secure in our knowledge. Everything definable and measured to exactitude. Empiricism reigns supreme. Mysteries exist only to be solved because otherwise their very nature would make many of us uncomfortable. Like the spirit of which Jesus speaks, that sort of mystery cannot be controlled. And this attitude is even found in the church, or dare I say, even in the seminary. It can be an uncomfortable thing, a vulnerable thing to admit such uncertainty, to admit just how much we don't know. It can be an uncomfortable thing to have a true encounter with Jesus, for he is not simply a dead name on a page. Even we who are to leave here as teachers and preachers are at times astonished or even humbled by such words as, "You must be born from above." Nicodemus came that night, certain that the mystery had been solved, sure of the clues that had led him to this point, but everything he thought he knew about Jesus was stripped away. He found himself in a darkness of another kind, the darkness of utter surrender. And still, the question remained, who is this man? However, Nicodemus was not left there. Jesus revealed to Nicodemus the limits of human understanding and reason, that there is only so much that we can know on our own, unaided. Because getting to know Jesus is more than reading the right book or having an amazing Lenten discipline. They certainly are helpful and not to be discounted, but something else is needed. We need something else to penetrate the threshold that is the mystery of Christ. And what is required is that encounter with Jesus. What is needed is that gift of continued self-revelation, because it is only through coming into encounter with Jesus that we may begin to know him. It is encounter born of surrender and trust. And to begin to know him is to be born from above, to be born anew. This is the birth of water and spirit that initiates the Christian life. And it is a birth that does not denigrate or replace our natural birth, but rather it is one that fulfills and affirms our identity as those who are the union of body and spirit. It is a plunging into the mystery that is Christ. It is a plunging into the mystery with eternal remainder. A plunging into the mystery of the Son of Man lifted up, lifted upon the cross, lifted from the grave, lifted into heaven, lifted up for us. And above all, it is the beginning of a process of union with the divine, or what one might call salvation. We are not told of the sort of state that Nicodemus was in as he left Jesus that night, but it would not be a stretch to say that he left with more questions than answers. With the question of, who is this man, continuing to reverberate in his mind, but he did not remain the same. This encounter with Jesus, this encounter with mystery enfleshed, had left its mark. And we will not hear about Nicodemus for quite some time, but we will hear about him again. We will hear about him on Good Friday, as Jesus hung, crucified, and abandoned, with Nicodemus coming to the foot of the cross with spices fit for the burial of a king, helping Joseph of Arimathea bear the broken body of the one whose encounter with him had been life-changing. The season of Lent is a holy time of repentance and self-reflection. That much is true. It is a time in which some of the most potent mysteries of the Christian faith come into focus. But Lent is also an invitation into holy dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction with what we think we know about Jesus. It is an invitation to enter into the darkness of unknowing, because the disciples first had to enter the cloud on top of the Mount of Transfiguration before they could begin to make sense of the light. It is an invitation for us to continue to ask the question, who is this man? For us to plunge into the mystery insoluble, a renewed encounter with Jesus. Because to know Jesus is to be known by Jesus. And to be known by Jesus is to begin to be transformed.